And we want to try to sort some of this out, this escalating crisis between Israel and Hamas. Bringing in now Michael Singh. He's the managing director of the Washington Institute. Michael, so listen, you just heard David Lee Miller report that statement from Netanyahu about an hour ago saying that international pressure is not going to stop Israel from acting against militants. You just saw behind David Lee an airstrike, the plumes of smoke there. I mean, is there anything that can be done to stop the momentum towards what looks like is going towards war?
Well, Arthel, remember that the last time there was this kind of conflict between Hamas and Israel in 2012, that operation lasted for 8 days. Before that, in 2008, 2009, Operation Cast, led by Israel, when Israel did go in on the ground, that operation lasted for over 3 weeks. And so this one's been 4 days, and it may still have several days or even weeks to go. And I think that the key thing is that rocket fire from Hamas needs to stop. It's indiscriminate. It's targeting civilians. And, of course, Hamas is embedding itself in a civilian population there in Gaza. And it's important to keep a very strong focus on that.
And strong focus on that. I hear that, Michael. And so if you look at culpability, I mean, where does it lie on both sides?
Well, look, I think that, again, remember, Hamas is a terrorist group. It's indiscriminately targeting civilians on the Israeli side, and it's embedding itself in that civilian population amongst the Palestinians, and therefore putting those civilians at risk as well. It's important also not to ignore the regional dimension, because those rockets and those missiles are coming from somewhere, and they come on these ships that from places like Iran, through countries like Sudan, and it's important not to lose sight of that bigger picture as well. Of course, Israel doesn't want to see civilian casualties. The United States doesn't want to see civilian casualties, and that's going to have to be a big part of the calculus for Israel going forward, as I'm confident that it is.
And I understand, you're right. You can't really, I mean, there's so many sides. You can't say there's culpability on just two sides here. And I'm not laying blame on anybody, just for the record. Don't tweet me. Let's talk about the U.S., Michael. What can and should the U.S. do to assist or support Israel?
Well, on just one more thing on the culpability point, Arthel, it's important to bear in mind that without the rocket fire, there is no conflict. That, in fact, the rocket fire was going on for a long time before Israel responded. And we need to be, again, keep a strong focus on the fact that these are terrorist tactics that Hamas is using. In terms of what can the United States do, look, the United States, I think, faces a similar challenge to Israel in fighting terrorism, and there's a lot of cooperation between the United States and Israel to do that. And I think the United States has appropriately kept a strong focus on the need to begin any de-escalation with the end of rocket fire, and placing a lot of pressure on the Palestinians, on Hamas, and on others to make sure that rocket fire stops for the good of both sides, frankly.
And when you talk about putting the pressure, in what form does that come?
Well, I think it comes through a number of ways. I think, again, the United States and Israel cooperate on counterterrorism. But there's also diplomatic pressure. And then, of course, behind the scenes, the U.S. will be talking to the Israelis about what are their objectives, how long will this last, how do you best accomplish those objectives, again, while minimizing to the fullest extent possible civilian casualties. There's a number of different tools and methods that the United States is using to try to bring about a quick and positive result here.
Yeah, your heart breaks when you see the civilians running for cover. And Michael, Judy Miller was here our first hour, and she pointed out that you're talking about in Israel an actual administration versus a terrorist organization in Hamas, and the kind of different rules that they play by, if you will. So I think that's what your point was as well. So
that's absolutely right.
Yep. Okay. Michael Singh, I have to go. I thank you for being here, and we'll